It's just the 90s are vulgar. Like the 90s are a very vulgar time. Um,
Is this the best pop punk album of all time? Is Blink 182, Enema of the State, the best punk rock pop punk album of all time? And it's a very specific question.
hmm. So I don't know if it's like definitive yes. But like I also don't know what else am I putting in that slot. Like if I'm not gonna put
Right.
that, then I would have to put Dookie, which I don't even think is representative of why you would say Enema is the greatest of all time. You know what I mean? So then I
Wait,
think
what?
so. What I'm saying is like I if I don't say it's Enema and say it's Dookie, that kind of discounts everything that would have come after because a lot of what came after is yes very much influenced and inspired by Dookie, but a lot more of it sounds like Enema of the State. I would say.
Right. I think the point that I was trying to make was is that it was a specific question, and it was like, is it the best pop punk album? Not so much is it the most important, because I do think that those are two very different questions, and I also think that there's probably different answers for each one. I think that Blink is the better album. I think Dookie is probably the more important one because it was the launch pad for all of it, including Blink 182. So it's kind of a stupid trick question, if you will. But you know what's funny is that when you get down to it, the two best pop punk albums of all time, 5 years apart. Explain to me why they both have to do with butts. I've thought about this so much. Why is one called Dookie and then one is called Enema? Like what are we doing here? Is it simply because that's the nature of pop punk, or is it because it's the universe cracking a joke on us? Dude,
Oh
it's so
god.
weird that those are the best two albums in this genre. That they're both in the '90s and they're both booty albums. Like, what are
Like
we
you
doing?
can't you can't acceptably say their name in like acceptable society. I know it's great.
Right?
Um,
Yeah, it's so strange. They're
I
so
think
immature.
I think you answered it
Dookie,
in your
Enema
declaration.
of the State.
It has less to do with pop punk. It's the 90s. This is just
That's a
that
good point.
it's just the 90s are vulgar. Like the 90s are a very vulgar time. And so like everything's Bart Simpson, everything's a fart joke. Everything is
Dude,
kind
for
of like
real.
that
That's a
in the
great
90s. So
point.
I think that pop punk was like a very much and I've never thought about this, but pop punk is very much a 90s expression of culture in a lot of ways. Like
Yeah,
pop
it
punk
really
really
is.
feels like the 90s. Even like the pop punk in the mid
Yes.
2000s, you just
Still
feel
feels like the
it's still
90s.
a very 90s feel. So I just think that's what it is. It's like the 90s were just all about like making jokes and laughing out loud at those jokes. Which Blink-182 as a band, very much that is their concept of making the jokes and everyone laughing along at the jokes. I think that was just in the I don't know, we had the Butthole Surfers back in the day. We had a lot of
Shout out Texas, bro. They're
there
from
you go.
here. Uh, I think I'm gonna put up a poll, and I'm gonna put up two separate polls. I'm gonna wait a couple days in between them, and I'm gonna see if anybody gives me any crap. And I'm gonna put up uh, which one is the better album, and then I'm gonna put up which one is the more important album. I'm gonna see if I get any kind of dialogue in there because I do think that it's honestly. I think on when you ask the question, I think my initial like snap answer is like, "Oh, Blink's the better album. Green Day is the more important one." But the more you're talking, there's a lot more influence coming from this Blink album than I initially kind of registered. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, influence is a little bit different time period. I think, like
Yeah.
again, the because I think of the 2000s pop punk all just sounds so much like that's why he's made the Newfound Glory point. Like I don't know that Newfound Glory sounds quite like Newfound Glory if Enema doesn't come out. You know what I mean? Like I don't know
I mean, that's a really good point.
from a perspective of the influence and also the perspective of they were on the same label, so Mark is kind of hanging out with them
Right.
as well. Yeah, it's weird though because I felt like the influence and probably similar to Green Day, it didn't really get birthed though till like people of my generation and younger actually started making music. I've noticed that.
That's a good
Because
point.
it's a lot of these bands that are like the kid bands of the when we were young.
Yeah.
Those are the guys like bowing down to this album and kind of talking about it in the way we are. So I think it did have, and not like it didn't have immediate impact. I think the both Dookie and Enema had the thing of like a lot of under talented bands got signed because those albums were big. So it's like we can
Yes.
replicate that, and we can do that. I think so. From that perspective, I don't know how influential that was because it was in a hodgepodge of a whole bunch of other stuff. But you look years later, all these guys, some of them who stayed with punk rock and went to other genres, they all kind of cite this album as a hugely influential album from their youth because it was just a huge album. Again, it was ever like I talked about, like I remember my aunt having a copy of the cassette. My aunt knows nothing about punk rock or
That is
anything
so weird.
like that. It was very,
Well, that's I mean
very
that's
prevalent.
how there was a handful of records like that. Blink, Green Day's Dookie, Offspring Smash was like that, where people that didn't care or know anything about punk had a copy of it. I do think that those are the two at the top of the genre, and everything else I would say is pretty far behind those two records, though. And I do find it a little bit odd that after all these years of not really caring about Dookie, that the last like 6 months I've actually come to be a pretty big fan of that record. It's really weird. I'm glad they're playing it in its entirety now because I was really dreading that. I really was
Yeah.
sincerely dreading it. Now I've come around to where I'm like kind of stoked I can film it in its entirety and like revisit that at some point. But because I've had to do the review on the channel, we covered it a couple times, and then I got a cassette tape at my store, so I used that as the tester tape for my new stereo. So I listened to it like front to back twice in one day, and I've just been listening to a lot of Green Day, and it's just started to grow on me after like 30 years of
A bit of connective tissue though. You had Jerry Finn mixed. He didn't produce Dookie. Raul Cavallo did, but he mixed Dookie, and then he produced Enema of the State. So there's a bit of a connective tissue between those two
I
albums
bet
as
he
well.
had something to do with the title of both albums. That bastard. Oh
He
my
probably
goodness.
what. It's funny. You see photos of him, and again, he's passed on. He looks like the most just like generic dude. But like all the albums he produced were nothing but fart jokes, as you were saying. So this guy must have had a
That's
hell of a sense of
hilarious.
humor.
Dude, that's so funny, bro. The fact when I realized that one was that and the other was like the same exact title, I was like, dude, that's the universe coming together and just going like it's just so random. Like, I would love to know if there was a reason behind the name of either of those besides it just being like I don't know why Green Day called their record Dookie, but I
Yeah,
think I have an idea why Enema was called that.
yeah, and again, talk about a relic of the time period. Like, how stupid was it? Like, thank God the album was good. How stupid was it to name your album off a take off of a movie that was like popular, but like Enemy of
Wait,
the State. That's what it
oh
was a takeoff of. Remember the Will
yeah,
Smith, Gene Hackman movie in like the late
wait,
80s?
really?
Yeah, Enemy of the State. So then Enema of the State was just a quick play off
Yeah, but
of that.
that's like a term, not necessarily from the
No,
movie,
but
right? Or is
that term
that
was popularized in the late night. Like it, this
okay?
album was, well, at least that's how I
Whoa.
always take it, was a direct reference to that movie being so popular
Oh
at the
man, I
time.
don't know. That's crazy. You might be right. I've never thought about that. I do know that their other working title was The Diarrhea of Anne Frank, which I personally prefer.
I love that.
And again, though, with the booty reference, dude, like these
Yeah,
guys have
yeah.
some like butt fetishes and stuff. And I'm not kink shaming, dude. Do your thing, fellas. Do your thing. But The Diarrhea of Anne Frank might be the best title of all time if that had come to fruition. That's repulsive and offensive and hilarious. Like I'm in, dude. I'm in. But yeah, you couldn't have called it that. That would have crossed a line. I think people would have been pretty upset by that one.
Well, you
People
do
don't.
that, and it just stays punk rock, right? Like it never like
That's
E-
that's a
Enema
good
of the
point.
State was hard enough to. And again, another thing that people had to say in polite society is you had to say Enema of the State.
Yeah, yeah. That's funny, man.